What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Frankie D'Astoli Show. I am your host, Frankie D'Astoli. It is a very exciting month. We're in the month of December. There's a lot of things that go on in the month of December. We have Advent for us Catholics out there. It's the season of joy, the season of hope as we await the coming of Jesus. And that's taken in two forms: the coming of Jesus when he was actually born, with the whole nativity, everything along those lines, and then the coming of Jesus when he comes for the second time, which is something that we prepare ourselves, we prepare our soul for. But as business owners, as entrepreneurs, the month of December is also the last month of the business year. So there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of hope as the new year rolls around for potential things that are going to happen in 2025 for all business purposes. But there's also a lot of preparation, just as there is in Advent, right? You're preparing your taxes, you're preparing just to have everything in your portfolio or your business buttoned up before you get into the end of the year and you start anew in the beginning of 2025. So much stuff to talk about as the month of December rolls around. We are going to continue to talk about, things around business, things around Advent, all of that stuff. But today, being that it's the first episode, the first official episode of the Frankie D'Astoli Show, I just wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about who I am and kind of go through, my life as it's been ever since I've kind of been a young adult, to take you guys to kind of where I am currently now and where I, foresee my life going, God willing. And really, when we talk about these stories that I'm going to bring to you guys, I want to really pull the decisions that were made in those moments, right? And some of those decisions were split-second decisions. Some of those decisions were, made over the courses of months or weeks in some cases. But those decisions that were made they become the reason of why I am who I am and why I do what I do. And again, I'm not someone who's going to love to talk about myself on the show necessarily, but I feel like if you guys are going to be listening in, and I appreciate everybody that's listening in, that's watching in, I want you guys to kind of know who I am, what I do, what I've done, and how I've gotten to this point. And again, from this episode, with these stories that you guys hear, I really want you to take away the decisions, the things that went through my mind when I made those decisions and the outcome that those decisions had on my life currently. So without further ado, we are going to get into the story of Frankie D'Astoli, and I appreciate everybody that's listening. Again, thank you guys. I'm very excited. So we're going to talk about a lot of decisions that I made, but the first decision that we're actually going to talk about is a decision that my parents made. And as a father now with a daughter and a son on the way, I really see the importance of what it is to be a parent and the things that you instill on your kids. And that could be anything from, places that you put them, schools that you put them in, whatever the case might be, just the way that you go about everyday life as a parent. But my parents, just to give them a little background, we were born in Brooklyn. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment for a few years. We moved out of Brooklyn when I was 5 years old. We moved to Jackson, New Jersey. If anybody knows Six Flags, it's like 10 minutes from there is where I lived, right? And yes, I was a season pass holder. I would be at Six Flags every single summer. Fright Fest was the best, hands down. But one of the things that my parents weren't, very wealthy. I would say we were, middle class. Like, my dad was very blue collar. He was a construction worker. My mom, for a period of time was a stay-at-home mom, which was the best thing ever. And I highly push that on any married couple. If there's a way to make that work, it's the best thing ever to have the mom, or a parent at home so that the kids have that person to be with. But they were blue collar. Eventually my mom ended up working in a bank. She still works there today. And, there wasn't a lot of talk of money in the house. And that's something that as I've grown older and I started reading books and became more knowledgeable, I realized that there is such a big importance on that. But I didn't get so much financial literacy from my household. I got good work ethic. I got, how to battle through adversity. I've watched my parents go through some challenging times, and that's taught me a lot. But one of the decisions that my parents made that was hands down one of the best things that they've ever done for me was at 6 years old, they put me in karate. And I went to a place called Art Binds Karate in Howell, New Jersey. It's still there today. It has been ranked one of the top karate schools in New Jersey for a very long time. And it's taught me so much. And I went there. I started as a white belt at 6 years old. And to this day, I'm a third-degree black belt now. I trained there for roughly 18 years, pretty much. I was the chief instructor for a period of time. It was an unbelievable time of my life. And as that time went on, there was a lot of adversity and there was a lot of challenges with being in karate. There were, you go through leaps and bounds. Sometimes as a kid, you really enjoy it. Sometimes you don't. But I continue to push through. And my parents never let me quit when those times got challenging. And that was so important. But what really karate taught me and what I took away from it, and if there was a pie chart of my life, I would say karate probably represents about 50%, if not more, of who I am. And it taught me discipline. It taught me how to set goals and how to go achieve those goals, how to break those goals down to really make sure I'm hitting on those points and to go reach it. It taught me courage. It taught me that, there's going to be, regardless of where you are in life, you're going to have to take some risks at certain times. It taught me so much that I've pulled from and I've put into my everyday life today and continue to do. But one of the best things that it taught me is really goal setting. And karate does that through ranks, right? Which a lot of other martial arts do as well. But you're a white belt, cool. How do I get to yellow belt? I'm a blue belt. How do I get to purple belt? I'm a brown belt. How do I get to black belt? And it's setting up those goals. It's breaking up a long-term goal of black belt, which over the course of 8 to 10 years it could take, and it breaks it down into ranks so that you achieve it. And my parents putting me in there was hands down the greatest decision that they've made for my life, and I still reap rewards from it today. So I'm extremely beneficial, and a decision like that to put me in, and further decisions to not let me quit, is the reason why I am who I am. So I'm very appreciative of that from my parents, along with so much other stuff that they provided for me. But that took it a step further. Even when I was done and received my black belt, I continued to train, and I became a chief instructor at Art Binds Karate. And that right there, having, control and, the responsibility of running these classes, of running the programs with all these kids from, 3 years old in the little ranger program to, the adult class of people that are, 50, 60 years old, and having the, scale to train all of these different people, to work with them, to really build that, connection, to build that kind of, what's the word I'm necessarily looking for? Just like being a relationship builder with people of all different ages, being a role model to these kids. It taught me a lot of responsibility. So there's so much that I pulled from doing that. And that part of my life was really, really important, and I really enjoyed it. And as time went on, I was in high school, and my sister Alyssa, who's a doctor now, she's a pediatrician, she went to the University of Delaware. And I was like a sophomore in high school when I visited the University of Delaware, and I went to a fraternity party. And I remember leaving there and I was like, yeah, I got to go to Delaware. Like, there's no doubt about it. I need to be at University of Delaware. And I specifically need to be in the frat Sigma Alpha Epsilon. Like, that was on my mind. I think I went home back to Jackson, and I started the first ever day drink in Jackson, New Jersey, which was in my backyard when my parents weren't home. So like absolute like disaster of what was going on there. But I was just so influenced by Delaware, specifically the party life. And I was not the best student. I probably got like C's, some B's and stuff like that. But I was dedicated to really try to turn it around and to hit my stride so I can get into University of Delaware. And when the time came and I was a junior or senior, whatever it was, and I started applying. I applied to University of Delaware, and I got denied. And this was devastating to me. Like, I vividly remember just like getting the small envelope, which is the envelope that you get when you get denied, rather than like the big kind of yellow, whatever it is, 8x12 envelope with like a bunch of documents in it. So I get that from University of Delaware, and I know it, and I open it, and I'm just devastated. And it just felt like this whole vision of what I had. And the vision wasn't built on like very positive things. It was built on like partying, getting into this frat, and like enjoying a college life. But it was this goal that I had set out to achieve that I failed. I fell short. I got denied. And this is one of those moments that, there's a decision to be made. And this has come up a lot in my life. And it's acceptance, or it's to push through the obstacle. And right now, the obstacle was that I got denied. But in my head, it wasn't over. And what I decided to do the next day is I called admissions and I said, hey, look, I know I've got denied, but I'm asking for you guys to re-review my application. I will do anything that you guys ask me to do in order to get accepted. And after about a couple days of waiting, I get a call back that they extended me an interview. So I said, this is fantastic, because I know that my skill personally is being personable, is getting in front of people, talking to them, and building good rapport. So I took this opportunity and I said, I'm going to knock this out of the park. I get all dressed up. I'm wearing my blue shirt with my yellow gold tie. I'm representing Blue Hens, University of Delaware. I go in there and I absolutely crush the interview. And they send me an acceptance letter for spring, which means for fall, I go to community college, I get some credits that transfer over, and now I'm in University of Delaware in the spring. And that decision to just not take no for an answer has now taken my trajectory of life to where I wanted it to go. And this goal of what I had to go to University of Delaware to foresee this future of mine is now back on the table. And again, it's because I didn't take no for an answer. So I get accepted. as this is all going on, I'm still working at the dojo, right? I'm still the chief instructor there. And like I said, I love my life. I love everything I do with these kids. They, mean the world to me. Having the responsibility and the privilege really of being their chief instructor is one of the highlights of my life, still to this day. And as I'm there, I have a great relationship with my boss who owns the school. And before I head out, he makes an offer to me that he wants to give me my own school. And he said roughly in about 5 years, I should be making $100,000. And as a 18-year-old kid, that sounds like all the money in the world. And I remember going home and actually debating it. So this whole goal, this whole vision that I had in mind of University of Delaware was now possibly being triumphed by the thought of having my own karate school, by the thought of having $100,000 in 5 years. And I go home and I'm telling my parents about this. And again, even though sometimes my decision making might not be the best, their decision making is still on point. And they pretty much tell me, listen, I think that's phenomenal. We're so proud of you, but you should still go to University of Delaware. This is a dream that you have. You should live this out. You should go get your degree, and you could always come back to karate in the future if that's what you deem to do. So I take their prudent advice and I go to University of Delaware, and I spent 3.5 years there because I got in for spring, and I majored in finance. Phenomenal. I left the school. I feel like I literally don't even know anything about finance at the moment. I'm more interested in economics and real estate, but I have the finance degree. I watched Wolf of Wall Street one too many times and just like wanted to be Jordan Belfort. Now I look back on that movie and I'm like, gosh, that's absolutely horrible. The fact that I actually had that guy as a role model. But anyway, I majored in finance, got my degree. I ended up joining a fraternity, and you guessed it, I joined Sigma Alpha Epsilon. So any of my SAE bros out there, Phi Alpha, that was, again, it's this vision that I had in my head that I dreamt about over and over. I'm going to go to University of Delaware. I'm going to major in finance. I'm going to be an SAE. And these things happen and it starts to progress. And my time in SAE taught me a lot. And I think there's a lot of, negative connotations towards fraternities, but being in a fraternity and going through some of the things that you go through, you really learn how to push through adversity. You learn how to prioritize your time. And then when you get involved in the fraternity itself, there's an executive board. Like, you actually learn leadership. You learn a lot there. And it is what you make of it, right? If you go there and you simply just want to party, cool, then you'll be someone who simply just wants to party. But if you actually want to take the fraternity and almost make it into a business franchise and see how you could expand it and how you could get better, that's a lot of, responsibility within itself. And you learn a lot of skills through that. And that's something that I absolutely did. I also linked up with something called UDance, which is a foundation that runs for the Be Positive Foundation, and it's all about pediatric cancer. And this was something that I really held, close to my heart because I had such a connection with working with kids with karate that now I was able to hang out with some of these kids that had cancer and watch them battle through some adversity. And that was just some of the craziest things that I've witnessed, and had the privilege of being close with some of these families and building relationships with them and making these kids' lives at least in some case happier and more fun when we did some activities with them. And I took that a step further. I was the chapter rep for my fraternity for SAE, and I took that a step further in my senior year. I was on the executive board. I ran all of the fraternity side of Greek life, and made sure that we raised all of our money that we needed to raise, and we really knocked it out of the park. And that was an amazing experience, and I'm so appreciative of that time with UDance. And even so to this day, I still keep up with the Be Positive Foundation, and they're doing some unbelievable things. It's a great foundation to donate to if anybody is looking for some places to put some money in some charitable foundations. As this is all going on, a few other things happen. So someone that I used to work with in karate, one of my karate instructors, I actually ended up linking up with him when we had some sort of anniversary, thing for karate. And he was in the medical device field, and he ran a distributorship. And his name was Ken Gershberg. He's still a great mentor of mine, still a great friend. He was at my daughter's baptism not too long ago. And I linked up with Kenny. And I vividly remember the story of him saying, "Oh, there's no better feeling of, being down $2,000 through sports gambling and staying up till 12 o'clock to watch the Hawaii and Nevada, women's basketball game, trying to make it all back." And it was just so funny to me. I'm like, this guy's ecstatic that he's down $2,000. What does he do? And he starts telling me about the medical device company that he runs. And I was like, I will do whatever it takes to be in that situation. Let me come work for you. I will intern for free. I will do whatever it is. So this is another decision, right? I'm a sophomore in college at this point. And I see that I'm seeing somebody that I want to emulate, right? This guy, he's in this position. He's a wealthy guy. And I want to be there. I want to have the problems that he's having of being down in sports gambling, right? Not the best problem to have. But so I offer my services, right, in exchange for nothing, right? It's not, I'm not saying, hey, I'll come work with you. You have to pay me. I want the service for the education. And as a sophomore at University of Delaware, I started interning for his medical device company. And I'm going into these operating rooms, watching these surgeons put, devices in people and cutting people open. And I'm like, this is crazy. But then afterwards, we're going to cigar bars and steakhouses. And I'm like, yeah, this is everything that I want. Like, I'm ready to rock. So as this time's going on, I'm interning every single winter semester, every summer. Delaware had those longer winter gaps. I'm interning with him every time. And it leads to a job offer. And by the time I was going into my senior year, I already had a job lined up with him. But something interesting happened to me in that time. So my summer of going into my senior year, I started my first business, and it was called D'Astoli's Canolis. I made cannolis. That was what I did, right? And to be truthful with everybody that's listening, I'm not even a huge cannoli person, but the name went so good, and my Italian background just played into it, obviously, that I was like, yo, let me just make these cannolis and sell them, and I'll take the money and I'll go to the bars and I'll have a good time. And that's everything that I did. I created a brand on custom ink. I started printing shirts and sweatshirts. I made more money off merchandise. I took my cannolis, I linked up with some sororities, and I said, hey, instead of bagels and Andre, which we called it, which was cheap champagne and bagels in the morning, I was like, let's do cannolis and cocktails, or cannolis and coffee. And I'll get the fraternity to fund the money for me to make the cannolis. We'll bring them, and we'll have, we'll have the mixer between the fraternity and the sorority. And this thing absolutely popped off. Completely popped off, to the point where I linked up Applyables and made a D'Astoli's cannoli bowl on campus. And I brought the supplies over there, and I got a percentage, a royalty fee in a sense, for every single bowl that they sold of that. So it totally popped. And what I realized in that moment is entrepreneurship was deep, deep, deep in my blood. And this was something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed creating. I enjoyed expanding and really building a brand, building something out of it. And that was very much just the beginning. Now, my cannoli company isn't really much around anymore. Ever since then, when I graduated University of Delaware, I did some stuff, especially during COVID. I was doing deliveries to people, and I was making some good money through that. But for the most part, my life kind of progressed, and it's something that I hope to build out in the future and, possibly give to my, kids as it's something like their first job or whatever it is, or whatever the case might be, to my mom and stuff like that. But it's a great idea that I'll definitely have to continue to expand on some point. But this was the point where I said, I love entrepreneurship. I love building. I love creating. And that's what I'm going to continue to do at some point. But at this point, I now have a full-time job in medical device sales. And I graduated from University of Delaware. I'm working full-time. And I have what everybody that's listening that's probably 21, 22 wants. And I had a shore house literally 30 seconds away from DJ's in Belmar. And if you've never been to DJ's, it's basically like a basement party on steroids. It's absolutely out of control. But it just screams Jersey Club. And like, for me, like, that was awesome, right? But at this point, when I graduated, it's kind of like I'm at this point where I'm a little tapped out, right? I partied so much at Delaware, and I graduated with decent grades. But again, like, my time at Delaware, I'll be the first to admit it, like, was more so for fun, right? And I graduated, and I've kind of like, I'm feeling a little tapped out. And at this point, I'm kind of realizing that, like, the satisfaction I'm getting from going out and partying and having a good time and, like, drinking and posting on social media and all this stuff, it's very short-lived. And I think at this point I'm maturing a little bit, where I'm kind of like, I think I'm ready to just start building my future more so than, continue to just focus on, like, this short-lived satisfaction that I'm getting. And at this point, I've kind of made that decision to move on and leave this stuff behind me. I'm not saying like I became a total hermit, but I just kind of started, like, not being at the shore house that much. I started focusing more on my career. I really wanted to expand and grow within medical device sales. I wanted to build up my clientele. I wanted to go get more docs. I wanted to start, making a lot of money. And that kind of became the focal point of what was on my mind, right? And I wanted to really start building out that future. And this is where the true turning point came for me. As all of you guys know, I'm very religious. I've already spoken of that in the trailer and on this first episode. But I went to church with my mom, right? I went to a Catholic church. And I went up to receive the Holy Eucharist, which is the actual body of Jesus Christ. And after I received that, one of the greatest things, the greatest thing happened to me. I received the Holy Eucharist. I turn around. I'm going back to my pew to start praying. And I pass this girl, Christina Hall. And I know Christina. I know her family because I used to teach her little brother karate. And I pass her, and she doesn't see me, but she's got her head down. She's praying. And I go back to the pew, and I'm praying. And at this point in my life, I'm kind of praying for a little bit of guidance. I feel like I'm kind of tied up in old life with, going out and doing all this stuff. I'm not feeling the fulfillment. And it was in that moment where I saw her that I felt like that's my future. And I remember leaving church with my mom and just saying, I saw Christina there and, she's really beautiful. She's very faithful. Like, I think this is what I want for my life. Like I could see this woman in my life and I could see my life progressing with her in it. So I go back home. It wasn't necessarily that night, but it was over a few days of kind of thinking about it. And I did what every, like 22-year-old kid that, wants to talk to a girl does. I slid in her DMs, right? So I slide in her DMs and, I hit her up. It was around 7 o'clock on September 1st. It might've been 7:03. I still remember this so vividly. And about 3 hours go by and she doesn't answer. And I'm like, man, like, this is kind of crazy. Like, I get it. Like maybe she's playing a little hard to get, but I'm like, it's been 3 hours. Like, look at your Instagram. So I go upstairs and I'm going to bed. It's around like 10:15. And I pray every night before I go to bed. But this night I said in particular, I said, God, I want to make this a little bit more sincere. I decided to get on my knees bedside and I decided to pray. And I gave into this full surrender. And I just said, Lord, if Christina hits me back, I really, really believe that she's the one for me. I'm going to marry this girl. In that moment, my phone vibrates. And I knew what it was. I didn't even look at it. I knew what it was. And I just said, Dad, thank you. Because I know what this is. It's my future. And I look at the DM. And of course, she said, hey, like, yeah, I'd love to get together. And that was the start of all of it. And now just to give you guys some, like a little fast forward, I'm married to her. We've been married for a little over 2 years now. We have a 1-year-old daughter and a son on the way. So it's progressed very quickly, right? And that was September 1st of 2019. So, but it was in that moment, and there's been so many times where I've invoked God in my life, but that was, one that's very, it stays on my mind a lot, is that full surrender that I've had and this kind of commitment to my future. Because I knew that if I were to get involved with her, that would be it for me. I would be forever, lined up for what was to come. So as this is going on, Christina and I start dating and we make it official on October 4th. But before we made it official, there was a little bit of temptation that came into my life. And that temptation came when I was, before her and I even started dating, before we even went out on our first date. This was back in August of that summer. I had been reached out to on Facebook by this woman that worked for MTV. And something that you got to know about me is when I was younger, like I always wanted to be famous. Like everything that I did, I loved being the center of attention. I loved, posting things and doing all this stuff and just like, being very outgoing. And I wanted to be famous. Like that was something that I always wanted to do. I have, an older sister, Tara, who's, she's an influencer. Like she was very involved in like, like going on shows, being like an extra in some shows, like being on some shows. I even did some extra work at some point and I wanted to be famous. That was something that I wanted. So when this woman from MTV hit me up, she was like, hey, like I came across your Instagram. Like, I think you'd be a great fit for like this reality TV show. And at first it was supposed to be that I was just going to kind of like guest star on this thing. They were doing like this whole like Vegas project. And like, they wanted me to like be like kind of someone that like these girls knew, to like kind of just like be someone that's kind of like in and out. So they like give me an interview and I interview. And the interview goes like really well. And they end up like turning around and being like, hey, we're going to totally change up this show. And we're going to basically make it Jersey Shore just in Vegas. And what's crazy is I used to love Jersey Shore. Like I would like really dress like these guys. I had the full blowout with the spiked hair and everything. And if you're from Jersey, like you kind of probably were in that same boat with me at some point. But like, I remember I met Mike the Situation when I was like 12 or whatever it is. And I was like, I'm going to be on season 10 of Jersey Shore. Like, I'll see you there. So now I got this woman from MTV, 10 years later, telling me that they're starting up like a Jersey Shore, but they're going to do it in Vegas. And they want me to be one of like the, 4 or 5 guys that are going to be in there with the girls. And I'm like, wow, like this is literally like everything I wanted a decade ago. That's like happening to me right now. And at this point I made the decision. Christina and I weren't officially dating yet, but I knew that if I went to Vegas and I did this show, it was over. There was no way I was coming back to this extremely faithful Catholic girl after I was just doing, shots in Vegas and doing a bunch of other stupid things. And it was in this moment where I really had to say, like, what do I want for my future? Do I want to be this, reality TV star who I've always wanted to be? I've always wanted to be famous. I always wanted to have like this, fame and this, wealth from it. Or not necessarily wealth, but just be rich from it. Or am I going to stick with what I feel like God has put in front of me and continue to go down this path? And I made the decision to do that. And I said I'm going to stay with the girl that I have because I know that this is something that I really don't believe I'll ever find again, and this is the path that God put in front of me. So I decided to not go to the like kind of callback interview. They were going to fly me out to California, and I just kind of like put them on block. Basically, I didn't officially block them, but I just wasn't answering their calls. And I remember one day when I was working in medical device sales, I was in the Bronx, and I'm getting call after call from this lady, and she's blowing me up, like asking, like why I didn't come out. And she basically bypasses the total callback and was just like, Frankie, like, please take my call. Like, I have something really important to tell you. And I get on the phone with her, and she says, listen, I know you have a lot of things that you're thinking about, but I just want to let you know that Paulie D and Vinny are running this show, and they've specifically said they want you to come out and do this show with them. And that was literally like a dream of mine. I literally, like, everything I did, I replicated this guy, Paulie D. And again, it was a moment of temptation, but I stayed the path. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to continue on this path. And I respectfully declined. And that was it. I put that part of my life behind me. And at this point, things have progressed, right? So now at this point, Christina and I are dating. We were dating for about a year and a half. And I made a decision that I was going to get engaged. And I really think for me, we dated for about a year and a half. I didn't give it a lot of, like this whole like, oh, let's, date for a handful of years, let's move in together, which a lot of my boys do, which I totally respect. For me, I think this is something that I just look on and I say, I usually am in the position of I'm pretty decisive. I make quick decisions when I know that I want what I want. And we decided to get engaged. And it was hands down the best decision that I've ever made because, I have this woman of mine, Christina, who supports me significantly, and it's been outstanding. So we end up getting engaged. And at this point, another thing happens to me. And if you haven't picked up on, but you will pick up on, I hate being stagnant. And I'm in medical device sales, and I'm absolutely crushing it. At this point, I'm 24 years old. I'm making well over $100,000, which for a 24-year-old is a really good amount of money, especially when I'm still living at home. I'm going out to dinner all the time. I'm buying nice clothes. I'm doing all these fun things. But I hit this point where I didn't feel that fulfillment. I didn't feel like this is where I wanted to be long term. I felt like I was still kind of looking for myself and what I wanted to do. And at this point, I had read a book that if you haven't read, I highly recommend. It's called Rich Dad Poor Dad. And in Rich Dad Poor Dad, it's not a real estate investing book. It's more so just like a financial literacy book, but it talks a lot about investing. It talks a lot about buying assets over liabilities. It also talks about how we are, most people trade their time for money, right? You go work a job and in return, you get a paycheck. Whereas the wealthy, the rich, they don't do that, right? They buy assets that create money for them. But ultimately, what I realized is where I was in medical device sales, although I was making a ton of money, I was absolutely in that equation. I was trading time for money. And when I looked at my boss, who again, I respect, I love, I see the lifestyle that he lives. It's an awesome lifestyle. He has a lot of money, but he works like a dog. He works 80-hour work weeks. And as he's getting into his, early 40s at this time, that's not a lifestyle that I really want for myself. I wanted something different. So after reading this book, I knew that I wanted to get into real estate. And at this point, I had to make that choice of how am I going to go about this? I'm working in North Jersey. My wife, my fiance at the time, she used to live in South Jersey. I went down to South Jersey. I loved the area. I said, this is an area that I want to build my family in. This is an area I could buy real estate in. I could do a lot of things here. And I knew that if I continue to work this job in medical device sales, I wouldn't be able to do those types of things. So I make a decision. I decide to, at this point, instead of trading time for money, I'm going to trade my time for education. I'm going to switch careers. And I'm going to try to find something in the real estate realm so that I could get educated on investing. And this was, a little bit of a challenge because of how great of a relationship I had with my boss. I love him to death. And, he had such a great vision for me of what I wanted. And for so many people out there, it would be like, that's an amazing plan in the future, right? Like that's something to absolutely capitalize on. But again, it just wasn't for me. So at this point, I started looking on LinkedIn for some things. And I knew I didn't want to be a real estate agent. I didn't want to necessarily be on the retail side. I wanted to be on the investment side. Like this was a big thing. I wanted to get into the real estate investment game. So I started looking at some stuff. I started applying for some property management stuff. I'm getting denied left and right. I started applying for project management. I'm getting denied left and right. None of this stuff is jiving. I find this company that's a real estate investment company on LinkedIn, and they have a role out there for an acquisition specialist, which is pretty much someone who just make cold calls and take phone calls. And I apply and I get denied. And I'm like, yo, this is crazy. Like, I work with orthopedic surgeons. I sell medical device products. Like, I know how to sell. They're telling me I can't answer phone calls and call people and try to book appointments. So again, similar to what happened at University of Delaware, I just didn't take no for an answer this time around, right? I replied back and I say, hey, I respect your guys' decision, but would you mind telling me a little bit more about why I got denied? I feel like I am qualified for this role. As this goes on, I go to church, right? And I'm praying about this and I'm bringing this situation to God. And I think this is such a big piece that I hope everybody takes from this. When you're in these times of decisions, bring these things to God. Ask for his intercession, ask for his guidance. So I go to church, I'm praying about it. And as I walk out of church, similarly what happened when I DM'd Christina, I get an email offering me an interview. And when I go for this interview, it's not for the role of acquisition specialist. It's for the role of acquisition manager, which there's a difference. The manager doesn't take phone calls. The manager goes in the field, meets with sellers, and gets deals under contract. Now, I'm saying this from a point of obviously I know what they do. I had no idea what this was, right? I don't know anything about real estate at this point. Like, I really don't. So like all of this is brand new to me, but I know how to sell. So that was what I kind of was like, leaning on. So at this moment, I'm like, all right, God's in my corner. There's something that's going to happen here. I take this interview, and what I find out is this is a real estate investment company that does wholesaling real estate, which is something I very, very knew like the bare minimum on. I read a book called Investing with Little or No Money Down by Brandon Turner. He briefly touched on wholesaling. That was the amount of wholesale experience that I knew at this point. So I meet with the interviewer. I then get a second interview. I meet with the chief acquisition officer. I then get a third interview. I meet with the office director. And long story short, they extend me an offer. And what I want everybody to understand here is, like I said, I'm making well over $100K working in medical device. This offer was a 60% pay cut from what I was making. I'm engaged. We have a date for a wedding, and I'm someone who wants a big family. So my thought is I'm going to start a family pretty quickly, God willing. I'm reflecting, I'm praying a lot about this decision. And ultimately, I come to the conclusion that I am going to take this. I'm going to trade my time for education with the goal that eventually this will lead to me becoming an investor where I could buy assets, have those assets pay me, where I do not need to use my time to get that paycheck, right? At this point, the assets are paying me. I could, in my future, have this life of doing what I want, when I want, with who I want. Living life on my own terms is really a great way of putting it. So at this point, I decide to take the job. This was a very, very tough decision. Like I said, a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation revolved around this. Having to tell my boss, who I love, that I'm leaving was really, really challenging. And it came with temptation as well. Of course, he was trying to make offers for me to stay. He was trying to keep me around, things that were very, very hard to say no to. But ultimately, again, I made this decision that I was going to trade my time for education rather than money, knowing that there is a good chance that this progresses to something bigger in my future. So at this point, I leave my medical device sales job and I link up with this wholesale outfit. And there was so much learning that went into this. When I jumped into this role, I had no idea what wholesaling real estate was, like literally none, aside from reading that book like I had mentioned. So there was so much that had to happen. And ultimately what I actually realized is when I came in, so this office was in Philadelphia. When I came in, I was under the impression that this office was absolutely booming, and it wasn't. Like, it was on the verge of closing down. So you got to imagine at this point, I am, newly engaged. I just left a, really good paying job. I jumped in with this startup company, and they're on the brink of closing the office down. And I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to have to beg for my old job back. Like, here we go. This was an absolute disaster. But I said, listen, you know what? Let me do everything I possibly can to succeed here. And what I ended up doing was I ended up reaching out to the chief acquisition officer, who I had an initial interview with, and he was a really cool guy, and I had his number. And I just said to him, hey, like, what will it take for me to be successful here? I want to do really, really well. And as his time as a chief acquisition officer, he's never had anybody ask that to him. And immediately he calls me. He spends an hour with me on the phone talking about things. And then the next day he flies me out to Nashville to shadow him and to shadow a couple other guys in the Nashville office. And that moment of asking, what will it take for me to be successful? That moment of me showing that I'm invested, that I want to do this the best that I possibly can, again, was one of those decisions that took the trajectory of my life and put it on a whole new level, right? So I get flown out to Nashville. the chief acquisition officer ends up becoming a great mentor to me. I have some great mentors that are in Nashville that when I go back to Philly and I start running all these appointments, I'm calling them after every single appointment and I'm learning more and more and more about real estate, about how to, acquire contracts with wholesaling, right? And all this other stuff. And so many things start happening. I start aggressively climbing this corporate ladder. So at that point, I was an acquisition manager. The office was about $600,000 in debt. I started in September. By the time we were in March, we were a profitable office. At that time in March, they hire me to become the office director, right? So I'm taking the current office director ends up going to corporate. He ends up going out to Nashville. They end up putting me as the office director role. At this point, I am still running all the appointments because I don't have anybody to bring on to start running the appointments. So I continue to run appointments. We start running up the numbers aggressively. I start bringing other people on. I start training them, this, that, and the third. All of these things start happening. As this is all going on, this is all 2021, 2022. As 2023 starts hitting around, there's a huge correction in the real estate market and things get very, very crazy, right? So all these other offices across the nation start having some serious problems. And to make a long story short, and I'll maybe make another video and expansion on this, but to make a long story short, the whole sales force basically just leaves. The whole sales leadership, just either they get fired or they quit. So at this point, I have been promoted to a regional sales director. So I am now running the New Jersey office, the Pennsylvania offices, and I'm also kind of running some stuff in Memphis, Tennessee, and some stuff in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I get called in to Nashville, to HQ, and pretty much I'm sitting down with the CEO, and they're saying, what do we got to do to get back on track? And my response is, listen, just start sending me everywhere. Send me to all these offices. Let me get into Alabama. Let me get into Texas. Let me get to these places. And I will start training these reps and trying to do everything we can to get back on track. And that's exactly what happens. For about 6 months, I start flying everywhere. For every 3 out of 4 weeks, I'm gone, right? And at this time, I have a pregnant wife at home. I got a lot happening. I'm traveling all over the place. And there was a point in time where I thought this was legit. I'm going to eventually be a director. I'm going to be a VP of sales. I'm going to move my family to Nashville. I'm going to do all these different things. And as this all starts going on, I'm flying all over the place and I get back home. And at the end of that summer, they bring in new sales leadership. They bring in a new director of sales. They bring in a new VP of sales, which I was totally fine with. I felt like personally, I wasn't at a level where I could take on that role just yet. I enjoyed the role that I was in. I enjoyed being the boots on the ground guy that was working with these reps, that was helping them achieve the success they were looking for, that was helping making these offices profitable. But when this new leadership team came in, a few things started happening. This company started becoming a lot more corporate. And we started to, kind of just see some changes go down the line. And this new leadership just didn't really know who I was. And it just kind of created a little bit of, I don't want to necessarily say animosity, but it was just different. It was just a different vibe. My relationship with the CEO and the chief acquisition officer totally changed. I didn't talk to them nearly as much. There was more of a chain of command and things just started changing. And as all of this started happening, November 18th, 2023, which is my wife and I's 1-year wedding anniversary, was also the day that my daughter was born. So I have my baby girl, my first kid, and my life just totally changes, right? The love that I've always felt in my life is on a whole nother level now for when you have a child. And it was an unbelievable moment in my life, but I realized that this flying around to all of these different offices at this point, it just wasn't worth it for me. I was at a point now where, again, I fell back into that spot of I'm trading time for money. And now I have a daughter at home. I want to be home. I want to be doing, my own thing again. I want to work towards getting back to where I was originally on track of. Just learn from here, learn how to be an investor. So as this is all going on, again, I'm skipping around on some stuff, but I ended up buying my first investment property. I ended up buying a house hack duplex, which I'll talk about more in the future. One of the best investments that I made, and it was the first deal that I ever made. I'll talk more about that. But I'm at a point where I'm feeling a little stagnant, right? I'm feeling stagnant with where I am. At this point, there's a new director of sales, there's a new VP of sales. I'm kind of looking at it there's no real timeline of when I'm going to move into those roles. So I decide to respond to this feeling by requesting a raise. And I felt like all the work that I've done in the past, I didn't get a raise for. And I'm going to say, you know what? I'm feeling a little stagnant. I need something to kind of boost me back. I need to get a raise, right? I need to get a raise so that I feel like all the work that I put in, it's meant for something cool. I could celebrate over this extra $10,000 that I get a year, whatever it is. And I got denied. I got denied for the raise. After all of the hard work and effort that I put in, I didn't even get any type of legitimate, conversation about it. I was just denied flat outright. And at that point, I kind of just came to the realization that this is the corporate lifestyle. This is what's going to happen. And it's no knock on anybody that's over at the little company. They were great. I totally understand like their reasonings in some factions. But I was at a point now where I just wasn't as valuable as I used to be, right? Now I'm not flying around as much. They brought on a few other regional sales guys, and there was no reason to give me a raise. And at this point, I had realized that I'm done here. My time here is up. It is time for me to take what I have learned and to go build my own thing. And at this point is where I realized this was the beginning of January 2024. So as I'm making this decision, this is one of those decisions where, unlike some of the other decisions where it was split that second decisions, I either accept this denial letter or I respond, right? I either, am going to, decide to go to Vegas or I'm not. Like those were more split decisions. This was a decision that was made over months of time. From January, it kind of popped into my head. I would say I got extremely serious about it in middle of February, beginning of March. And as this all played out, a few things happened. Now we're getting a little bit more into the present time for everybody that's following. I set up a vision of what I wanted to do. That was step one, right? I really focused on, all right, if I'm going to leave this company, what does that look like for me? Where is it going to take me? I started meeting with people in the industry. And again, same thing that I did when I got my internship in medical device sales. I just started asking, where could I bring value to these people, right? So I started meeting with some great investors that were doing the things that I wanted to do, that were buying the deals that I wanted to buy, that were, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of me and learning, from them. What could I bring to you that in return, I could get that education and continue to go on my investing journey, right? I also pulled a HELOC on my duplex. This was really big. I knew that if I was going to leave, I needed access to some capital that I could use, right? So I pulled a $30,000 home equity line of credit, which I used to go buy a new primary and used to buy my, first bird deal, which I'll eventually talk about. I started meeting with non-compete attorneys, right? I started figuring out, all right, how do I get out of this like pretty, rock solid non-compete so I could go and do what I've learned and make money off of it. Another thing that I did is I formed a partnership with my partner, Steven Danila, which now we have our whole investment company, D&D Equities. I started getting very serious about the development of my course, the D'Astoli's Dojo for Real Estate Investing. This is something that I started working on probably a couple of years ago. Again, like I've said, I've always liked to create. And even when I was, crushing it, flying all over the nation, I was building out this program in anticipation that if I ever left, this was something that I wanted to do. So at this point in February of 2024, I started really getting serious about building that out. I started getting on, course developers, developing the course, developing the logo, doing all of that stuff. I, purchased another primary, as I mentioned, and I rented out my duplex. I fully rented it out, which is now automatic, cash flow that's going into my account every month, regardless if I have a job or not. I bought 2 houses with my partner, Steve. We ended up buying 2 bird deals. And ultimately, all of this led up. This was really like the transition plan that was going on. All of this led up to May 17th, 2024, where I put my 2-week notice in, which looking back on it, probably wasn't the best day to do it. It was my sister-in-law's wedding, and at church, when she's getting married, I'm getting calls from the CEO asking why I'm leaving. So, but ultimately, that's what it was. It all led. This was a decision that was made over time that led to this, this outcome of I'm going to put my 2 weeks in. Again, when these things happen, temptations tend to roll around, right? And after that weekend, I end up getting on a phone call with the CEO, and he's alluding to some changes in the sales leadership that's going to happen and a new role that could open up for me, which will lead to more money, which will lead to more opportunity for advancement. And all of these temptations continue to boil up. And eventually it kind of just came to a point where, again, I said, it's not what I see my future as, right? I'm going to continue to push forward. And I made the decision to put the nail in the coffin there. And on June 1st, 2024, I officially left my job and was jobless in a sense, right? And I actually wrote down, I'm going to just pull it up on my phone real quick. I wrote down what I had said when I was leaving my job. Let me just find this. Let me see here. So it is. So here it is. This is titled, How I'm Feeling My First Day After Quitting My Job. This is on June 1st, 2024, right? The brain is for reasoning, and right now it's telling me I'm an idiot. That's what I wrote. The heart is for feeling, and right now I'm feeling scared. But the soul is directed by God. Mine is tranquil, knowing that it's following him. And that is how I felt when I left. My hands, my palms were sweaty. I was definitely feeling a little nauseous. I had probably about $10,000 in savings, which was about a month and a half of what I could withstand for, the bills and everything that I had coming out. But I felt good. I felt tranquil because I knew I was well prepared. I knew I've taken the steps that I've needed in order to put myself in a position to succeed. And ultimately, what I really knew, guys, is I knew I had my relationship with God. Like I knew that He was telling me to go this way because of the hours of prayer and meditation that went into this. And when I made that decision, it was scary. But looking back on it now, I wouldn't change a thing. And a few things happened, right? So like I said, I had about $10,000 in savings. There wasn't much. I had a 6-month-old daughter at the time. My wife, who shortly after that, and we ended up getting, pregnant again. We got a son on the way. But a few things happened. That first deal, and again, this goes back towards preparation, that first deal that my partner, Steve, and I closed on, at this point, we were about 3 months into this. We were able to refinance on it. And after the refi, we pulled $21,000 out of it. So that's awesome. We split that 2 ways. That's 10 and a half. About a month later, we ended up refinancing on that second property, which got us $40,000. So that's another $20K each for us. So all of a sudden, these things start padding in. And again, at this point, we're building out the company. And this kind of leads to the present moment. And there's been a lot that has happened over those past, from June to now in December, and even before then when we started transitioning. But at this point now, I'm at 17 properties and 19 doors, and I'm developing a legitimate team for D&D equities that includes an acquisition department, a property management department, a project management department. D'Astoli's Dojo is popping. I got a lot of students that are coming on, and I've even started something that I really feel is a big future plan of mine, which is rosary and real estate. And you're going to hear me say this a lot. I'm going to end every single episode with, go pray the rosary, buy real estate, because that is something for me that is extremely fulfilling, is being able to talk about faith, being able to influence and inspire people to become more faithful, to invite God into your life. And what I've realized now is over the course of this time, it has not been easy, but these decisions that I've made have led to who I am. And really what we talked about on this talk was good decisions for the most part. As I make more episodes, I'm going to be telling you guys a lot more about not so good decisions and how those things have kind of played out for me. And there's going to be a lot of learning in those exact, kind of examples. So get excited for that stuff. But overall, that has been kind of where it is. And just the long-term vision of where I really see it going is my partner and I, we want to get to 50 properties, or say 50 doors at least, right? At 100% occupancy with a $400 net cash flow that's going to equate to about $20,000 a month for us. At that point, we could each pull 10K a month. We know that everything is set at that point. And then we're going to continue to build the portfolio off of there. We might pivot into some more, bigger deals and all of that stuff. As this is all going on, again, God works in your corner. That whole non-compete issue that I was having with, that's totally gone. They've taken away non-competes for any non-executives. So now I'm wholesaling full-time again, which is additional cash flow that's coming in. I'm helping other people wholesale, which is really awesome because that's something that I love. I think wholesaling is one of the best ways to get involved in real estate. I'm continuing to build out D'Astoli's Dojo. And as I mentioned, we're going to continue to build out Rosary and Real Estate, which the mission statement for Rosary and Real Estate is to convert 1,000 people to Catholicism, to bring them to Jesus Christ, and to help 1,000 people achieve financial freedom through real estate. That is the plan for Rosary and Real Estate. I'm very, very excited about that. And I'm really, really excited to have you guys on. I appreciate you guys listening in. Again, as time goes on, you're going to learn a lot more about me. You're going to see a lot more of me if you're watching the video. But I really, really appreciate it, guys. And as I am going to continue to say, pray the rosary, buy real estate. Thank you guys so much for the support. And I look forward to talking to you guys more.